The Broncos' initial 53-man roster is here, and I'm here with Steve Atwater, the Hall of Famer, to break it down. Steve, we just heard from General Manager George Paton. He talked about this is a young and hungry team like we've heard all offseason, but he also mentioned this is the team that gives them the best chance to win right now, win in Seattle. Steve, initial thoughts when you look at this roster, what are you thinking?
Young, hungry, a bunch of guys who want to go out there and win, and I think that the veterans who are still on this team, they're inspired and they're motivated. They feel like they have hope to get over the hump this year.
I think so too, Steve. I mean, you look at this group and there's a lot of guys that have been added over the last couple of years. Let's start with kind of the draft picks and the undrafted guys, because we talk about young and hungry. That's part of it, right? And 6 of 7 draft picks made the team. And then you've got 3 undrafted guys in Blake Watson, Frank Crum, and Lavelle Bailey. Steve, starting with the draft class, we heard George Paton talk really highly about Jonah Ellis, about Devon Vele, Chris Abrams-Drain, obviously Bo Nix. Steve, this draft class in general, just, I guess, what have been your thoughts? And I'd imagine not a surprise to see that many of the guys make this roster.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a surprise because many times when coaches draft guys, hey, they want to keep them to see what kind of, how good they can be, But I think we have a ton of talent in this group. I've been excited about each of these guys at certain points throughout training camp. 2 receivers getting drafted, a later round draft pick in Devon Vele. He's really shown up big time here in training camp. Had a great training camp. Also Troy Franklin. I wouldn't say his training camp was great, but he has a lot of potential, and we know his ability. So I think that both of those guys are going to contribute quite a bit throughout the year. Bo Nix, obviously, I mean, guess we'll get to them a little bit later. But also having some college free agents step up, make plays, and I forget how many years this is in a row, but we've had several years where college free agents has made the team and contributed, so it's all positive.
Yeah, we're at 20 of 21 years, and there's 7 from the last 2 years. If you go back to a year ago, Sean Payton's first year in Denver. Steve, if you're a guy that's looking for a place to go, or you're a young guy, you've got to think, hey, Denver's going to be one of those places that gives me a chance. And it's not just the last couple of years. I mean, Rod Smith, Chris Harris Jr., there's a long history of undrafted guys making an impact. I mean, it's supposed to be a meritocracy when you get out there. And so when you hear that undrafted guys have a chance, it's got to make you feel good as a player, right?
Oh, definitely makes you feel good. And knowing that the coaches in the organization, they're picking the best players. They're not going off where you got drafted. It really is a matter of what your performance is on the field, how much effort you're giving. They're watching every single thing that you do throughout training camp, and I think we came out with the correct 53.
That's great. And, Steve, you mentioned the quarterbacks there. Broncos kept 3 quarterbacks in Bo Nix, Jared Stidham, and Zach Wilson. Sean Payton told us he was going to do that, and then they did it, so people should have listened, I guess. He said all through training camp, Sean Payton, that is, he liked this room, he liked the group. Certainly, he talked really highly about Zach Wilson as training camp went along, and we saw Wilson kind of start to get more comfortable there. And then George Paton made a point that I thought was really interesting, that around the league, you're going to see more and more teams keep 3 quarterbacks. Obviously, Steve, it comes at the expense of someone somewhere, but keeping 3 quarterbacks is probably the safest thing, right, to make sure that you've got a guy there, knock on wood that everyone stays healthy, but it just gives you options.
Yeah, and each of these quarterbacks has shown that they can play at this level. They've had really good training camps. Each of the quarterbacks that have been in have scored points in each game, so it's really positive. I like that we're keeping 3, and I think that each of the 3 quarterbacks will continue to develop and get better and better throughout the season. And again, as long as we have the same system intact, this is the 2nd year, now next year will be 3rd year, the longer we have it intact, I think the better we'll be and the better our quarterback play will be.
Definitely, and obviously for Bo Nix, I think it's helpful to have 2 veteran guys. I mean, they're still young somewhat, but to have them in there should be helpful for Bo. Steve, one of the tougher moves, and obviously the Broncos had to move on from a few veteran players, some Ajay Perine, Jonas Griffith, but Tim Patrick, obviously a fan favorite. That was a tough one. George Paton talked really highly of all that Tim Patrick has meant to this organization, his resilience, the way he came back from 2 season-ending injuries. But ultimately, there were a variety of reasons. Some younger guys that made an impact on special teams and just in general, kind of a crop of young players. George Paton talked about the impact that special teams is going to have in general this year with the new kickoff rule. But just your reaction to Tim moving on, and obviously tough for fans to see that.
Yeah, always tough when it comes to the end of the road for a player, especially a guy that's made an impact the way Tim has, not only on the football team but also in the community. Great guy, great leader. I know we will miss that. We'll miss his leadership, his fire, his passion for the game. But again, when you're going younger and you have younger guys and you feel like some of the younger guys can fill in. It may not be up to Tim Patrick's standards just yet, but they think that the younger guys could get to that level. That's unfortunate when change happens. So we definitely wish him the best. Heck of a guy. Love him and his family. And I'm sure he'll get picked up somewhere else and be productive.
Yeah, I hope he goes on and has success this year. I still think back to that Dallas game a couple years ago where he's catching the deep pass and does the TO celebration. I mean, Tim was a heck of a guy. So we'll miss him here certainly, but like you said, an opportunity for some younger guys. Steve, I would say the last thing here is just that it's the initial 53, right? Emphasis on initial, still a lot of potential changes that could happen. George Payton mentioned they're going to spend a bunch of time on Tuesday night looking at the waiver wire. Are there guys that are elsewhere in the league that can help this team? We've seen trades pop up after the initial 53 happen. And then there's the practice squad where you can have 16 players. Now you can have veterans there. You can elevate guys on game day. And so George Payton already kind of hinted that some of the veterans that were let go could potentially be back on this practice squad and be available for week 1 against Seattle. But Steve, if you're a player in the locker room and you've just made this team,
don't celebrate yet.
Yep, you've got to have the attitude, right, of like, I got to keep pushing, I got to keep going.
Oh, 100%. And that's just the beginning part, making the roster. Now you have to really show that you can perform on the Sundays and that. And again, there's going to be a lot of change here in the next 2 weeks with guys with teams finalizing their roster. So don't celebrate too quickly. Just, wait until you've made the team before you celebrate. But, yeah, you still got to continue to put out that wonderful effort that got you to this point. You can't stop now. And, so many guys, I don't know that they all realize the opportunity to play in the NFL and to get a chance to make a roster and play at this level, to have a connection with your teammates and coaches, how special that is. So soak it all up and make the most of this moment because even if you play 15, 16 years in the league, it still ends too soon for everyone. So make the most of it.
All right, Steve. Well, we appreciate your insight there. That's a look at the Broncos' initial 53-man roster for the 2024 season. Game against Seattle is just around the corner. For the Hall of Famer, Steve Atwater, I'm Aric DiLalla.